Hi, welcome back. This is Women in Priesthood. This is Rachel Patterson. Welcome to those of you who are new. I think a lot of you have come to my channel recently. Really great shout out to the guys at Midnight Mormons who recently interviewed me. We had a real fun time talking about different topics that are affecting kind of LDS culture and just LDS norms. And so we've had a lot of new people come into the channel, and it's been really rewarding to see some of your comments. And I wanted to shout out a few people that made really cool comments in the comment section. One of the things that I've really loved about starting this conversation on YouTube is when I started, I wasn't sure the kind of response I was going to get, because the internet can be kind of full of terrible comments. But the comments that we get from people are so uplifting. And I wanted to read a comment from a Janine Johnson, who's a seminary teacher. She posted a while ago, but her comment, Janine, it just touched me so much because it really gets to the heart of why I even started this channel in the first place. Janine Johnson wrote, "Thank you so much. This is such a great explanation. My husband and I teach seminary in our home here in Hawaii, and a while ago, some of the young women asked about the priesthood and felt let out and let down. And I thought that they thought only God only cared about women. I love how these videos detailed that women matter to God. You're doing great work. Keep it up." And I want to say to thank you to Janine and her husband, because one of the lies that I think the adversary is really peddling quite hard in the world and also in the church is that somehow young women or women are second-class citizens, and that is not true at all. And when you study priesthood power and you study the incredible access to God's power that Heavenly Father has made available to covenant-keeping women, you realize how, as women in the latter days, God has left us with so much power to make it through these last days. And the real work is done on the ground in the youth programs and in the relief societies, where you encounter friends or young women who are feeling discouraged, and they've bought into Satan's lies that somehow in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that somehow the priesthood is only for men, or priesthood power is only for men. And that's just not at all accurate. And so this YouTube is really meant to showcase all that the prophet has been teaching us even in the last 5 years, has been teaching us about priesthood power, its availability to women who are covenant keeping and covenant making, and how that power pairs with us in our relationships, and we bring it into our families, in our co-stewardships with our spouses. So the kickoff event for this whole website was, if you go to Spiritual Treasures, which is scattered throughout a lot of my videos, President Nelson had a call to action for all of the women of the church in 2019. And this was kind of right before COVID hit, which I think is so interesting, that he makes a call to sisters. And he says, and this is the 2019 Spiritual Treasures talk, he says, "As righteous, endowed Latter-day Saint women, you speak and teach with power and authority from God." Now, this is important. He qualifies this. Endowed Latter-day Saint women, meaning women who have made the highest temple covenants. Those are the women who have qualified themselves by choosing the covenant path to have priesthood power in their lives. So he continues, "Whether by exhortation or conversation, we need your voice teaching the doctrine of Christ. We need your input in family, ward, and state councils. Your participation is essential and never ornamental." He continues, "My dear sisters, your power will increase as you serve others. Your prayers, fasting, time in the scriptures, service in the temple, and family history work will open the heavens to you." And this is the point in the talk that inspired this entire YouTube channel. He says, "I entreat you to study prayerfully all the truths you can find about priesthood power." And that was a 2019 moment, an invitation from the prophet of Lord directly to women, specifically covenant-keeping women. "I entreat you to study prayerfully all the truths you can find about priesthood power." And in that moment, I didn't want to let that invitation, which has promised blessings coming with it in this talk, drop. I said, I want to take up his challenge. I want to study these doctrinal truths from the sources of priesthood authority in the gospel in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and hopefully create a community of like-minded people who are willing to talk about it with me. And also, as Janine, who commented before, take it to the youth and be able to explain to them how relevant they are in the plan of salvation, how much power is available to young women and women who have chosen to make and keep sacred covenants. Let's listen to President Russell M. Nelson actually say this talk, or say this quote, because I think it's quite valuable. So this is the Spiritual Treasures 2019 talk that he gave.
Study prayerfully all people, family history work will open the heavens to you. I entreat you to study prayerfully all the truths you can find about priesthood power. You might begin with Doctrine and Covenants, sections 84 and 107. Those sections will lead you to other passages. The scriptures and teachings by modern prophets, seers, and revelators are filled with these truths. As your understanding increases and as you exercise faith in the Lord's priesthood power and the Lord himself, your ability to draw upon this spiritual treasure that the Lord has made available will increase.
Isn't that amazing? When the prophet talks about spiritual treasures, he makes a promise, and he says, as your faith in the priesthood increases and as you study priesthood power, your ability to draw upon that power will increase. That's an incredible promise. And one of the things questions that I've asked for the last few years is, why now? Why are we getting such an incredible, overwhelming, it's kind of like an information dump when you look at the number of talks in the last few years that have dealt with women and priesthood power in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's overwhelming. We've never had this many talks. And I have been asking myself, why now? And the answer came very quickly, that we are living in the last days. We are to be a mother or a woman or a young woman in these last days with so much worldly opposition. We have to be very strong. And what I love is this idea that the Lord has granted us proportional help to the degree of difficulty we're dealing with in these last days. We had a really wonderful video, this one, Training for the Second Coming, which is really worth a watch. Sorry about these ads. Training for the Second Coming really details this idea. It goes through several of President Nelson's talks, and it discusses how women are such an integral part of preparing for the second coming, specifically preparing the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the Zion people for the second coming. It's it's amazing. Elder Eyring has said it, Elder Oaks has said it, Russell M. Nelson has said this link between women's valiantness in the last days and preparing for the second coming of Jesus Christ is mentioned a lot. And I wanted to turn to Jean B. Bingham, who was the previous Relief Society General President. She said this in 2022. She opened up her talk about covenants, i.e., right? Once again, that's another buzzword. If we're talking about priesthood, covenants we're talking about priesthood power, because to access priesthood power, you need to be a covenant maker and keeper. So the title of this talk is Covenants with God, Strengthen, Protect, and Prepare Us for Eternal Glory. And she says in the opening statement, Sisters, what a joy to gather in a worldwide sisterhood. As women who make and keep sacred covenants with God, we share spiritual bonds that help us meet the challenges of our day and prepare us for the second coming of Jesus Christ. And keeping those covenants allows us to become women of influence who can draw others to the Savior. So isn't that interesting? As women who make and keep covenants with God, we share spiritual bonds that help us meet the challenges of our day and prepare for the second coming. So when she talks about as covenant keepers, that automatically means women who have made the choice to keep covenants, to follow the covenant path, and engage and receive blessings of the priesthood power in their lives. Why do we need priesthood power in our lives? For these two reasons: to help us meet the challenges of our day. And in my last video, or 2 videos ago, I made about some really beautiful, it was a really beautiful article written in Turn of the Century by James E. Talmage about the divine and eternal nature of sexuality and sex. And he talks about how our gender was, the reality of our gender being a man or woman was a reality in the pre-existence and will exist in the post-mortal realm as well. And it's continuous. So when we talk about meeting the challenges of our day, I think you guys know what I'm talking about. There's just a lot of things coming at us, coming at our marriages, coming at our children, but the Lord has not left us alone, especially if we have made the hard, committed decisions to kind of let go of the things that might keep us from being able to keep and make covenants and to journey on in that covenant path. It's the reason he grants us this priesthood power in our lives is to meet the challenges of our day and prepare for the second coming of Jesus Christ. I get goosebumps when I think about that idea that covenant keeping women in this last days are a specific preparatory group of people for the second coming. Now, when I am no longer a Young Women's President, but I was the last couple of years I was, and I taught this class to young women, your 3 priesthood powers, and my husband was helping me with let's see if I can find it, your 3 priesthood seasons in life. It's this one right here. Your 3 priesthood seasons in life. This was based on a class that I would give young women. In that year, we were doing a lot of doctrine and covenants. So whenever questions came about priesthood power, I was like, this is a great time to unearth this class. And my husband was helping me with he was helping me with like the tech while I was teaching it. And he said to me this quote that I'm going to read you. He said, that's the most important and relevant quote I've ever heard about priesthood, and understanding the purpose of priesthood power, understanding its role in men and women's relationship to each other. Like, that singular quote clarifies the entire point of understanding priesthood power. It's a quote by Ballard that came from this talk called Women of Dedication, Faith, Determination, and Action. And this was given at a BYU women's conference. And this quote, it clarifies the purpose. Well, first of all, it makes a distinction between the kind of public, we see every Sunday, priesthood offices and responsibilities that you see more often, like passing the sacrament, giving blessings, presiding in a church capacity. Those are all priesthood functions and responsibilities that men are fulfilling. That's not the total entirety of the priesthood, and it's also not the purpose of the priesthood in and of itself. He makes this really good, this really good quote, and this is Elder Ballard. And by the way, Elder Ballard is he's just the person that I listen to the most, other than the President Russell M. Nelson, who is clearly studying and receiving inspiration for this issue of women and priesthood power, the purpose of priesthood power in general. He says, although the church plays a pivotal role in proclaiming, announcing, and administering the necessary ordinances of salvation and exaltation, all of that, as important as it is really just scaffolding being used in an infinite and eternal construction project to build, support, and strengthen the family. So let's say that again. His point is that the church and all of its organizations and purposes are just scaffolding being used as in an infinite and eternal construction project to build, support, and strengthen the family. He goes on, and just as scaffolding is eventually taken down and put away to reveal the final completed building, so too will the mortal administrative functions of the church eventually fade as the eternal family comes fully into view. In this context, it's important to remember that our church assignments are only temporary and that at some point we will be released by either our leaders or by death. But we will never be released from our eternal callings within the family. We are going to unpack that singular quote, and it just has so much perspective. The first thing that I want to come back to is this idea that the church and its administrative functions and purposes are important, but what are they? They are just scaffolding being used to strengthen the family. A lot of you remember a few years ago when the Notre Dame Cathedral had, and I wanted to pull up this video because I was fascinated about this idea of scaffolding and like, what is scaffolding? So here's this incredibly iconic building, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, and there was a fire that almost caused the entire infrastructure of this cathedral to collapse. And so this chief architect is going to talk about the process of upholding the original structures of the Notre Dame Cathedral, and also being, now this is what's so interesting. I want you to look. I always thought scaffolding was kind of a stagnant thing. Like it was something you just put up to hold a structure in place, and that was that. I didn't fully understand that scaffolding, look at these gentlemen, are things that you also adjust to accommodate changes that need to be made to the structure. So that's one thing this video shows, is that the scaffolding is being changed and is adjusting as they are, reconstituting the structure of the Notre Dame Cathedral. So scaffolding isn't a stagnant thing. It changes, it evolves according to the needs of that structure. And sorry, let me come back here. I kind of lost my place. Let's come back to this quote. Elder Ballard says, the church plays a pivotal role, but the church's role is scaffolding for what? The family. Now that is so interesting, because a lot of times when we think about the priesthood, we think that the priesthood is what we see at church. But the priesthood and priesthood power is so much more. If you come to my website, womenandpriesthood.org, and I'll leave this in the link, you come down here and there's this handout that you can open. How I like to explain, if you've seen this in my other videos, how I like to explain the distinction between the Melchizedek priesthood, which is what we see at church. The reason I have this kind of dotted line around the Melchizedek priesthood is because of this quote that Elder Ballard says, which is that at some point, let me find it. And just as scaffolding is eventually taken down and put away to reveal the final completed building, so too will the mortal administrative functions of the church fade as the eternal family comes fully into view. This brings up questions, I think, of the millennium and the way that we operate in the millennium as a Zion community and then in the eternities isn't going to be the church administrative functions that we see now. The church administrative functions, all the ordinances that we see in the church, are exclusively designed around supporting the eternal family. The family is something that you see in the temple, the eternities, in the home. Those are the things that the church is entirely designed around supporting. So it's very interesting when you look at priesthood power and you look at families. I feel like when we get into this, and this is a real pothole that I think women can get into when they get discouraged and they're studying priesthood power, is thinking that men and women are in some kind of like battle for power and influence in the church. When the reality is that at the highest levels, i.e. the ceiling, where in order for a man to receive the highest level of priesthood power, status, and authority, he has to be sealed, which means that men and women enter into the highest levels of power and authority together. We are codependent upon each other because the entire purpose of the gospel of the priesthood being restored is to support eternal families. And we do that together. So this is how I want you to think about this. If we have the Melchizedek and Aaronic priesthood over here, this represents this. I kind of hesitate to use the word temporary, but if you take President Ballard at his word, where he says that the church plays a pivotal role, but it's still just scaffolding being used in an eternal construction project to build, support, and strengthen the family. And just as scaffolding is eventually taken down to reveal the final completed building, so too will the mortal administrative functions be taken down and fade away as the eternal family comes fully into view. So I think what that means in many ways is that while a lot of our public emphasis of priesthood power right now is given to church functions, right? When someone says priesthood, these are the images that come to mind: passing the sacrament, presiding in ward and church councils, serving missions, giving blessings. That's what we think of. But in time, what will really become more prominent as a function of priesthood power will be our eternal families. Eternal families that are created by covenant keepers, covenant keeping men and covenant keeping women. And that is the fullest expression, according to these insights by President Ballard, of priesthood power. That's why I think this is such an interesting quote, is so helpful to understanding what priesthood power is for. And that's why I think my husband said that is the most important quote that you could share with young women, and with men, is that church assignments are only temporary. And that's a very humbling pill to swallow when you have a calling or an assignment that makes you feel really good about yourself, an auxiliary leader. And we know that, or as a missionary, those callings can feel so important. But his real point, and President Ballard has somewhere between 8 to 10 children. He has a huge family, and his wife died a while ago. And so I can see in him this meditating upon the eternal truths of the eternal family versus the current world we're in. He says our church assignments are only temporary, but we will never be released from our eternal callings in the family. And our eternal callings, our eternal stewardship in this life will be as mothers and fathers. That's one thing that's another thing that I notice about priesthood when we talk about priesthood power, is that priesthood power always increases when you are willing to take on greater responsibility and stewardship for other people. Does that make sense? So when you decide to serve a mission, with this adorable family, when you decide to serve a mission, you're putting aside your own needs and wants and desires to go and serve a mission for other people. And that's typically when young men and young women go and make their first temple covenant, right? As we come back to this, I like to make this idea of priesthood engagement kind of like a choose your own adventure. So this is how I like to explain it to young women. I'm sorry to those of you who've already seen this, but if you have this Melchizedek public church kind of oriented priesthood over here, the first covenant you're going to make is baptism. That's this first heart. And you journey along. This little dot over here is sacrament, kind of renewing your covenants regularly. And eventually you're going to journey into eventually making your endowment, receiving your endowment. When you receive your endowment in the temple, that is a very significant thing, because it means that you are making eternal covenants and you are entering into the family, as President Kimball called this, the family priesthood, meaning a priesthood power that can protect your family for eternities. And what's so amazing is that as a single woman, or a woman who never is able to be married, or a woman who's divorced but has kept her temple covenants, you are in that category of the patriarchal priesthood if you receive your endowment and you keep your covenants. We want to continue further and aim for becoming sealed together in this kind of divine codependency so that we can bless our families, because the ultimate vision and direction of the gospel of Jesus Christ is eternal families. One of my favorite YouTubers that I just love is Christian Homestead. Let me pull him up real quick. And he does such a good job illustrating some of the things that we can expect in the millennium. A lot of his videos are really helpful in illuminating what's going to happen when Christ comes again. Things don't just end. We are absolutely, as women, preparing for the life that we will lead in the millennium, and the lives that we will lead in the millennium are going to be much more slated away from just church structure and far more heavily invested, and like the family structure and family life will be far more promoted than just the kind of, I think that's kind of one way to think about priesthood power as a young woman, is your role as a wife and mother is an eternal calling, and you can take it very seriously, because it's going to be one of the only callings. And for men too, the calling of father, patriarch, husband, those are the only eternal and enduring priesthood callings that we will have, that any of us will ever have. So anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for all of you new people who are here kind of checking out this website. We'd love it if you'd subscribe. Please comment. I love the comments. I'm always so impressed with how my husband's like, gosh, the people who comment on your videos are so insightful and so inspiring and very, very respectful and interesting. So your comments are really a relevant part of making this YouTube community worthwhile. And it also gives me ideas on what kind of videos you want to hear about. So I hope that I will be hearing from you guys soon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.